So my name's Jordan Azevedo. This is my testimony. There's doors in our lives. They look like challenges, but what's on the other side of them are blessings. They usually look like every other hard thing in our lives. I had a truck flip over one time. I was leaving work. I was backing down a dark driveway. I couldn't see everything. And what I noticed first was that the horizon went from like this and started doing that, but I didn't understand until I was upside down. That truck was totaled, but God gave me a gift in that moment, and I had the opportunity to start asking Him why. Not why like you did something wrong, but like I understood I was going through a doorway, and on the other side of it there was a blessing. I'd get the opportunity to talk with the guy who lived there, and I thought I would minister to him, but he was blessing me. And then a miracle happened. I got to see a truck that wouldn't flip over and was getting closer and closer to a gas main. And there was only one chance left before something really expensive and really time-consuming was about to happen. The Lord showed me to remove all the things that supported this truck and made it so that it would flip, that it would be easier, that it would have better purchase, everything that would make it do what we wanted it to do. We had to pull all that away. And when we did, we showed that we had faith in the Lord. And we prayed just like we were praying before, but we stopped paying attention to what was happening, and we started asking for what we needed, and the truck flipped over. And I'd take the insurance money from that truck. I'd buy a better truck for half the price. I'd figure out later that truck was perfect for a business that hadn't even started yet. And God would bless me by walking me through a door. So backing up a little bit, there was a doorway in my life that I didn't see coming. And one day my wife, we'd been married for about 8 years, but we'd known each other for almost 20. We'd been together since we were like 14 and 16. The only woman I'd ever loved. And she said, I think we should separate. And the thing that's really intense is that it didn't even register. It didn't even really mean anything to me at that moment. I just said, okay. And I thought, well, okay, I'll pray and I'll try and figure this out. I'll do it on my own. It'll work. Everything works for me. And I walked into it, and 6 months later I was in the exact same place. Nothing had happened. And then I called my parents and was like, hey, this is what's going on. And they gave me some good advice. Only I didn't know how to make that happen. So I just kept walking another 6 months. And then I got so desperate, I started asking anybody I could come across, how do I fix this? And I got some advice, and I'd take that and it helped some. But at that point, things were so far that there didn't seem like there was a way back. And so then something happened that meant I had to do something right now. And so I ended up in an apartment by myself for the very first time in my life. And within a couple days, they would declare that everybody needed to stay home for we don't know how long. And so I became really alone. I wasn't supposed to go to work. I wasn't supposed to go anywhere or do anything. And so I found myself really alone for the first time in my life. And I got distracted for a little bit. I thought I'd do this or I'd do that and make use of the time. All this time I was reading my Bible more than I ever had. God was my intention, but I had something that I could fill more time with, or something that was more interesting. I don't know how to describe that, but I started working out. And so 2 or 3 hours a day I'd spend in prayer and reading my word, and then the rest of the time I'd do that. And pretty soon God was like, that's not the purpose. And the way he did that was he used this guy I watched on YouTube to basically say that I've been focusing too much on this. I'm going to go back to focusing on God. And I heard the Lord. And then within a couple days, I found myself watching television for an entire Sunday. I don't know if you've ever seen Kim's Convenience, but it's a funny show. And it enveloped me, and it felt comfortable. And then I realized at the end of the day, just that dry feeling you feel when you've done exactly what you wanted to do and it didn't satisfy you. And I understood, okay, that's not God's purpose for this time either. And what I understood was God was saying, look, you've never been in this situation before. You've never had this much time before. You may never have this time again. So let's do this. And so I did. I'd wake up whenever God woke me up, and I'd walk. I'd pray. I remember one morning he woke me up at 2 or 3 in the morning, and I lived in Salinas at the time, and they have these strawberry fields. And I walked, and I just smelled the perfume of strawberries, the sweetness of it. It was a beautiful moment, and I believe I'll remember it all my life because I was walking with the Lord. And he would walk with me for those 3 months when everything was locked down every day. I'd just pursue him just as much as I could. And what he was teaching me was that if you love God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength, that's enough. Other things will flow out of that, but that's enough. And I learned that the little bit I had, the nothing that I had, was also enough. He showed me this way. If you take a little bottle cap and fill it with water, and you give that to somebody, if that's everything you have, that's enough for him. And what he'll do is he'll give you a water bottle back of his love. And then now you have more. So then you give him a water bottle the next day, and then he gives you a gallon jug. And then you keep doing that, and eventually you have so much that you have enough for other people. And he showed me that. And he also took time to help me to memorize scripture. And I'd write them on these little 3x5 cards. And I'd walk and I'd read them little bits at a time. And I'd come up with these pictures in my mind. There was this one that helped me. It went, God, you're such a safe and powerful place. And I think of the Fortress of Solitude, and see this giant ice cavern. And I knew that I was in God's hands. And it says, even if I fear, or I will not fear, even if every structure of support were to crumble away. And I saw some scaffolding on a building, and I thought if I was up there and everything fell away, I wouldn't have to fear because he was with me. And I'd walk and I'd talk with him, and we'd do this every day. And those 3 months goes by, and towards the end of it, see, the thing was before I was dead. And that's why when my wife said what she said, or the woman I was married to said what she said, it didn't have an impact because I'd already kind of bricked up myself. If you think about a house with doors and windows, there's ways for things to get in, right? Light, air, people, gifts, food, everything you need to live can come in and it can come out. But I'd been hurt in my life. I'd lost things that were really important to me, things that had my heart. And when that happened, I didn't want to feel pain. I just didn't want to hurt. And the hurts were too much, and I was too little, and I didn't know how. And so I'd take things, and I'd use those things to brick up those parts of my life so that it didn't hurt. I lost an animal that I loved. And, I had a video game system, and I just sat there and I went into that and just disappeared for a while. And that was there for me. But I found myself 20 years later doing the same thing and not having anything to show for it. Nobody's life was better. There was nothing good that had come out of where I had hidden. And so God had taken everything that I had based my life on, all the things that I'd used to support it, everything I tried to make traction with to get where I was trying to go. He showed me how to take everything away. All the things. The video games had gone. The pornography had gone. The alcohol was just about to leave. I wasn't smoking marijuana anymore. I didn't have other people other human beings that I was relying on. I just had God. And He would put other people in my life, and He'd bless me with other things to support me. But in that moment, I just needed the one thing. So He'd make that possible in that time. And so as I memorize scripture, I apply it to my life, and I think about how it worked and how it meant something to me and how it worked. And then as I was on this walk, it was early one morning. It was early enough to see the sun. Where I lived in Salinas, there was these mountains, and I really loved them. And I'd really take a lot of joy in them. And I was sitting and I was watching, and there was these massive clouds that were above them, even higher. And I saw the sunrise where it lit up the crest of the cloud like gold just before it came over. It was like liquid gold on this mountain. And I just rejoiced in the goodness of God. And I went home and I wrote it down, just how good He was. And around that time I got a phone call, and it was my mom, and she was telling me something that would be the worst news I'd ever heard. And it was that my grandma wasn't doing well. And she hadn't done well before, but I understood in this moment that it was different. And so two things happened almost instantaneously. One was that I felt pain. Like I'd never felt pain in my life. It hurt, and the way I describe it is like a hurricane. It just felt like winds of pain just flowing through my heart, through my life. And in that moment also, those scriptures came to my mind. And in that moment I grabbed a hold of God. Like if you had a tree and those winds were just flowing through, like they wanted to kill you, right? It was a moment where I could have got lost. I could have grabbed a hold of all those other things. If He hadn't have prepared me, I would have. There was a moment a lot of years before where I'd been drinking a lot. It was kind of my mainstay for how I made it through. And I got the very least amount of disappointing news. And that got turned into me almost dying. I'd wake up later in the hospital. My mom and my dad would be there. They'd be happy that I was alive, but really sad. And it was because I got just the barest bad news. And I completely crumbled. And in this moment, I'd grab a hold of God and I'd repeat that verse to myself, that God, You're such a safe and powerful place, a proven help in time of trouble, more than enough, and always available whenever I need You. And I just keep saying that, speaking that over myself. And as I spoke that over myself, I did something I'd never done before, which was to allow the pain that was in my life that was coming into me to go out of me. And so my mom would stay on the phone with me, and I'd just declare the goodness of God, and I'd speak those verses out loud and to myself, and a miracle happened. 2 or maybe it was 3 hours later, I'd take a breath, and I'd just feel peace. I felt peace, and I had overcome something. For the very first time in my life, I'd overcome pain. By God's grace and preparation and mercy, I'd had a key to say, look, if something powerful and hurtful is coming to me, if I hold on to God, I can handle it. I can walk through it. I don't have to hide. I don't have to run away. And so I'd go through that. And then almost immediately God began to bless me. I came to the understanding that I was to come up here to Yuba City, California, where I'd grown up. And I'd talk to my boss, and he'd give me the okay, and I'd talk to my landlord, and a miracle would happen so that I didn't owe an extra $1 worth of rent. Somebody would take over my year lease the very day after I moved out, and I'd find a job, and I'd be here, and I'd be doing all this stuff, and all these blessings were happening. I'd come here to the bridge, and I'd been in prayer. You know, I'd gotten some really devastating news. The woman that I'd been married to was moving on, right? And I began to fast. I began to pray. I don't remember how long I fasted or prayed, but in all that, I was also asking the Lord, I need brothers and sisters, mighty men and women of God, to surround me. I'd had some people back there, but I was in contact with them, and I needed people that were here. And so all this stuff was still happening. People still didn't feel safe to leave their homes except for the work or the most important things. And so my dad had a job where he was around a lot of people who needed to be able to do what they did, and so he would encourage me to stay home, and so I did. And as I'm living there with my family, I'm in this room that belongs to my little brother, and I'm just praying, asking the Lord for what I need. And a couple of days later, my dad would say, hey, if you want to go to church, that's okay. And so I'd been here to the bridge before, and I'd met a pastor and his wife, and they'd speak life over me. And so I came back here, and I sat in the back, and I just waited, and I wanted to leave because service had ended, but I didn't feel like that's what God wanted. So I just sat, and then this guy would come up to me, and he'd reach out his hand, and I'd grab it, and he'd say, hey, I don't do this a lot, but my name's Jordan, what's yours? And in that moment, I knew God was saying, I'm answering your prayers. And so, as I was being surrounded by brothers and sisters, I'd go into this home where more people would surround me. And I'd come to them and I'd say, hey, I need prayer. And they'd pray with me. And it didn't matter what I was going through, I could go to these people, and it didn't matter who I went to. I didn't have to be picky. I'd walk up to somebody who'd look at me for too long, and I'd say, hey, I need prayer. And they'd say, okay, we'll pray for you. And they would. And I'd be in contact with this woman that I loved for this long amount of time. And if I'm honest, I don't know that I really loved her, because so much of me had died through so much of my life. But I really wanted for this to work out. So I was praying and fasting and doing all the things I'm supposed to do, and asking for all these people who have God to pray for me. And then she says, hey, we filed separation paperwork, but it's disappeared. The court doesn't know anything about it. And I'm thinking, okay, well, that's a miracle. That's a sign from God. We should maybe try a different thing. And she says, so I think I'm ready. I want a divorce. And I say, okay. And I start to seek the Lord. It's the last thing I want. I've been a stubborn person in my life. And I have the capacity in myself to not do something. And I didn't want to do that. But the Lord would make it so it was something that I understood that He was allowing her to do. It says in Scripture that if your brother's wanting to take you to court, settle things with him quickly. And the reality was I prayed and I didn't get an answer. But then I asked the brother to pray for me, to seek the Lord. And he would. And as soon as I asked him, then I'd start to get that revelation that I shared with you. And then he'd call and he'd confirm that. And then I'd go through the process that only I could. Because she had moved out of state, she couldn't file. Because of where I lived, it had to be in my town that I did it. She had to come here. Everything had to happen here, and only I could do that. So I went through that process. And I'm praying and I'm believing that there's still a chance. And she'd show up and she'd call me and say something was wrong, and she wanted to meet. And so we met and we drove for hours. And I'm praying in tongues and I'm seeking the Lord, and we're driving, and I don't even know where we're driving. I've never been to this place I'm at, but we'd end up at this place. We wanted tacos, and we found tacos. And my uncle was there. Now, he worked in that town, but he was there just to pick up on this day, this time. And so I discerned that I was in the place God wanted me to be. And I thought, well, maybe she'll see that. Maybe she'll see that I'm being obedient to the Lord, that I can hear Him. And we'd talk and we'd have a good conversation and we'd spend that time together, and she'd leave, and none of it changed what it was that she wanted. It didn't change her that I had changed. It didn't change her mind that I'd sought God. It didn't change her mind that I believed in God. And so all that paperwork would go through, and I'd still think maybe there was a chance. And then here a couple weeks ago, she texted me and she said, hey, I wanted to share some good news with you. I've met somebody and we're engaged, and good things are happening in my life, and I'm thankful for all the things that I learned during our time together. And it hurt, but now I had the opportunity to pursue God and to give that to God, and to set what hadn't worked aside, and to continue to pursue God, and to continue to be blessed by God, and to continue to do all the things God's called me to do in my life. God's blessed me. He's shown me that my purpose is to find people who don't know their purpose. They don't know where they are, and help them find their way back. A lot of times when I talk to people, they say, I believe in Jesus, but I don't fellowship anywhere, or I don't worship anywhere. Or they'll say a lot of times I don't go to church. What I understand from that is that they're alone, and that they've gotten lost, and that they need people, and that God sent me to them. And so I'll just share a little bit of what God's done in my life, and I'll encourage them, come over here where I've found God. Come worship the Lord with me. And some people do. And that's my purpose. And so I have joy. I have peace. And I have the favor of God in my life. Yesterday, somebody called me. I'm in a service industry and I have clients, and called me and said, hey, we don't, nothing against you, but we feel like we want to take more responsibility for our space. And so we're gonna do that. And I understood that was a separation for a time. And I said, I think that's an opportunity for me. I think there's a doorway here. I think that even though, and I'm saying this in myself, even though I'm trying to expand what I'm doing, I'm trying to bring on people, I can see that God's opening a doorway for me. And I told him I was thankful for all I'd gotten to do for him. And I went home and I laid down on my bed. And I thanked the Lord for all the doorways that he's given me the opportunity to walk through. For the opportunity to have that truck flip over and turn into a blessing. For the opportunity to have this client step away. But today somebody called me and said, I think we're ready. I think we want you to come by. Give us a price. And for the woman that I've been married to say, I don't think I want to do this anymore. And now for God to be in my life. Everything that's a challenge, it's a doorway. And Brie Quintana, she'd shared something with me one time, a dream she'd had. In the dream there was mountains, and in between the mountains was fire. And somebody told her, don't go through there. But she understood that to get where she was supposed to go, she had to walk through that fire. And I believe that if you'll trust in the Lord and you'll walk through that fire, that you'll be blessed. That's my testimony. That's what God's done in my life. That's what God will do in your life.